Today we're interviewing Professor Thomas Sargent, the winner of the 2011 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. Professor Sargent currently teaches at NYU as the W.R. Berkeley Professor of Economics and Business. We are thrilled to be speaking with you today, and it's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Raul Kawuru. I'm a freshman at St. Paul School and the Vice President of CompanyRoots.
My name is Suresh Jasti. I'm a junior in Homedale High School, and I'm the founder of CompanyRoots. Before the interview, we just wanted to thank you again for taking your time to talk to us. And again, it's an honor and a privilege to be speaking with you and have you on CompanyRoots.
Sure,
So,
it's an honor for me. Just make sure the questions are all easy.
Yeah, that might be a little hard for us. We have some good questions today.
Okay, good.
So the first question that we always ask is, what were your roots and how do they get you to be the person that you are today?
That's a great question. I don't think much about that. I more think about the future.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we all have roots. I guess a couple simple things. I had parents who were their families had been very badly hurt by the Great Depression of the 30s. They grew up in the 30s. Especially my mom grew up in a very poor family, had trouble making ends meet. My parents were always talking about the Great Depression. So that made me want to be curious. That made me curious about economics and maybe about how macroeconomics could make things better for people. And then the other thing is, like you, when I was in high school, I was interested in lots of things, but I had a couple great teachers. I had a geometry teacher who was tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an algebra teacher who I thought was being mean to me. Like every day he picked on me. He'd send me to the board and I had to solve problems. And he taught me things that I still use today. So I don't know, those are roots.
So you grew up in California. So right now you're actually teaching at NYU in New York. So do you see like a big cultural change between like the two areas of the US and like how people perform their job in both areas?
Actually, no. See, I think people are just people, no matter where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't. My wife grew up in Southern California too.
Mm-hmm.
On the right, she grew up on the right side of the tracks. I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks.
Okay.
Yeah, there's superficial things that are different. But
people are people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. So your work primarily talks about macroeconomics, monetary economics, and time series econometrics. So could you please explain a small summary about your work to our viewers?
Okay, so that's so here's what economists do. I'm an economist.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think there's only one kind of economics, micro and macro. We use the same approach.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically try to figure out what determines how prices and quantities of almost everything in sight move. So like my grandsons asked me about prices of of goods that they buy.
Yeah.
They buy, what determines quantities, and then what. So they move over time. Like you guys are sitting on computers.
Yeah.
They didn't exist when your grandparents were alive.
Yeah.
And then they were extremely expensive, and now they've come down. So question: why the price come down?
Parts are more accessible, I guess, and people have the technologies to make it.
Yeah, that's the kind. So you're a good economist.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so that's how we start thinking. Okay, so then we think. Okay, so that's what micro and basic economics is about. So we try to figure out actually what things are produced.
Mm-hmm.
Why do people produce more of some? Why do they produce more? I don't know, baseball mitts and baseballs than they do. Things that are used at the opera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing is.
So that the basic our big answer was things that produce that people want. There's more people. You might not like it, but there's more people that like baseball than like opera.
Yeah.
I like both actually, but I didn't when I was your age. I just like baseball.
Yeah.
So we
Did you-
study that. So what macroeconomics is about, it's about something a little different. So most of the time, if you look at U.S. businesses, um, failure rates are really high.
Yeah.
Most new businesses that start, they fail.
Yeah.
But there's new businesses started all the time. So the American economy is it's like creating new jobs and creating new businesses, and it's destroying them. It's a
Yeah.
big
It's like a serial
theme.
kind of thing.
Yeah. So and lots of people that have successful businesses, they started 3 or 4 before they got one that worked.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so all those things average out mostly. So actually, if you look, an example would be if you look at how many, you'll see a report that comes out on Fridays
Mhm.
About the number of new jobs that the U.S. created.
It was like
Yes.
201,000 this month.
Good, you're up to date. Yeah, they're around 200,000. They say 200,000 new jobs created. Well, that's it. What's actually true is like every month, like some 2.5 million are created and 2.5 million are destroyed.
Yeah.
And the difference is a really small number. So, so that's good to keep in mind. So usually that just averages out.
Yeah.
Okay, but sometimes, and this is what macroeconomics is about, it doesn't average out. Everything gets good for everybody on average, or everything gets bad. So
Yeah.
there's kind of a boom and a recession. That's what macroeconomists try to study. It's pretty hard. We've been studying it, hard since the Great Depression, and we've learned some things, but we still have a lot to learn. So
Yeah.
it's study. And then the final thing is, so how do you study it? I don't know, like you guys, you get some data, and then you learn statistics. That's a tool you can start learning in high school, but
Yeah.
it's how you learn things. Statistics is about how you learn things from data. So that's what I try to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My AP economics teacher, I'm taking that this year. I got kind of inspired after I went and saw everybody present last year. But Mr. Guastella, he actually has a question for you. He would like to hear your defense of the argument against intervention because it doesn't improve the employment situation in the long run. He says that we have gone from 10% UE, which I assume is unemployment rate, in 2009 to 3.9% in 2018 as the Fed lowered their target rate. So would this have happened regardless of intervention? And 10 years is not the long run. So when we stay under 5% UE for 20 years, will that count?
So that's a good question. Okay, so so like it or not, the the background to his question is, kind of what determines the unemployment rate in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we study. That's kind of the question. And the question is, can the government have effects on it? And how?
Yeah.
And are the effects positive or are the effects negative? And how long do the effects run?
Yeah.
Well, those are the questions he's getting at. And what he has in mind is, 40 years ago, a friend and I wrote a paper. And we wrote a particular paper, okay? And we took a particular model that was popular at the time. So this wasn't the world. This was a particular mathematical model that had a theory about what determines unemployment. And it had a theory saying the government was really powerful in determining unemployment. And then you drill down into the model and you ask, like, what was the avenue through which the government actually was able to unemployment in this model. And it turned out it was by fooling people. The only way it did it was by fooling people. And the model had hardwired in. I'm not saying this is a great model. That's not what I'm saying. The model had hardwired in is that the government could forecast the future and knew a lot more about the structure of the economy than the people who were in the economy actually doing jobs and running businesses.
Yeah.
And all my friend and I did is we took that same model and we said that the people inside the model could forecast at least as well as the government.
Okay.
That's what we did. So that the government didn't have the ability to forecast better, and it didn't have the ability to manipulate things to fool people.
Yeah.
And then what happened was in that model, because fooling people was the only way the government, could manipulate the economy.
Yeah.
Couldn't fool people, could manipulate the economy. And then so that was called, like, that got a name. It got too much recognition because it was called the policy ineffectiveness proposition.
Okay.
Okay, so what's true is that's true only in that little teeny model. Now in models that are more realistic, the government has lots of abilities to affect outcomes, and that's what political struggles are about, like regulations, taxes on different things, different corporate tax rates, different, all those things. Those have effects, and those are effects that we all try to study. So, then so that's kind of background.
Yeah.
And then the answer to your question is, did what the Fed do in particular
Lower the market rate.
have a big effect on unemployment? I think you have to parse that. I think what the Fed and the Treasury and President Bush and President Obama did, and President-elect Obama did in 2008, that did things which prevented unemployment from getting a lot worse. I think there's no question about that.
Okay.
They acted really fast. After what the Fed's done since then, that's very controversial.
Yeah, because it's still happening.
Yeah, and I think I wouldn't pin it on the Fed. See, the guys that work at the Fed, they actually don't do that much, and they know that. If the press writes them up as they're really powerful. If you actually look what they do, they have very limited powers, and they know that. So I think the reason the economy, the reason unemployment's low is guys, people go find jobs, and businesses go out and create jobs, and that's a complicated process that we try to understand.
Yeah.
The long answer to it. So it's a complicated answer, but your teacher asked me a complicated question.
That's true. I'm pretty sure he'll be content with the answer you gave him, though.
Okay. Fortunately, he doesn't get to grade me.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I mean, you called me a great economist before, so I think I might get like an automatic 100 there from him.
Yeah.
So I read online that you have two influences, Professor Robert Lucas Jr., an American economist at the University of Chicago, and John Muth, who is known as the father of rational expectation revolution in economics. So how did you meet them, and how do they impact you in life, and how many theories and what do you take from them?
Okay, so I met Muth only once, in person.
Mm-hmm.
He said about 5 words to me, but he wrote a couple papers, which I read when I was about 23 years old. I couldn't understand them. Read them and I read them and I read them, and then I went and took some math and statistics class, and I came back and read them. And I read them again, and then literally about 7 years later,
Wow.
I understood them well enough to actually do something with them. So actually has a huge influence. Basically, what he wrote in those 2 papers kind of ripped my mind apart and made me go back to school and learn a bunch of stuff. And then Lucas was the guy I met him the year before I went in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was a similar thing. I learned that I should read some of his papers. Started reading his papers. Similar thing is, I realized they were important, but I realized I couldn't read them right because I didn't know enough math.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back and took some math classes, went back and reread them, you know, so that's what I did. That's the influence on me. It's more like, it's kind of like the influence that a good teacher has, you know.
Yeah.
For me, teachers, there weren't just the guy, Mr. Miladowicz, my geometry teacher in high school, and Mr. Pilmer, my second year algebra teacher.
Yeah.
Hey, let me tell you what Mr. Pilmer said to me. Okay, every day, first I thought he hated me, but years later I realized he didn't. So he was a tough old guy.
Mm-hmm.
He has his class, and every day he'd say he'd have a problem. He'd say, "Here's a problem." It'd be a word problem, and he'd say, "I need someone to go up to the board and get a volunteer." There'd be no volunteer. Mr. Sargent, go to the board. So there I was up there on the board, you know, and I'd start working on it, and then he'd say this to me every day, "Mr. Sargent, you're thinking. Mathematics is so you don't have to think." He'd say that every day. Do you know what he meant?
I have an idea, but I can't be sure.
Okay, I tell to myself, like once a week, I run into a problem where do not skip steps.
Mm-hmm.
What mathematics is you write down everything you know and you make a list and then you apply the rules.
Mhm.
And you apply the rules in order and you do not get fancy and you do not skip steps. Okay, so my wife said I tell her, Mr. Miladowicz said this brilliant thing to me. Mathematics is so you don't have to think. So Carolyn says, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. That wouldn't help anybody. But it helps me because what I do is I skip steps. I get myself in circles. Then I go down to the board. I have a big whiteboard.
Mhm.
I stop skipping steps. I write down what I know. And I don't skip steps. And guess what? Usually works.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually applies. That completely applies to me because like last week I started doing my SAT prep. So for most people, like they don't actually do it in the junior year, I suppose. So I held it off, but it was really because of my math skills, which weren't that great until this year, where I kind of worked on it over the summer. But like you take a simple equation like 2x plus 4 equals 12, right? You know x is going to be a simple answer. But one of the steps that I never did was go like 2x plus 4 equals 8 minus 4 on both sides. And I somehow, so it's like those small steps really,
Yeah.
they contribute and they help.
Yeah, but it empowers you.
Yeah.
And then here's what else you find out. Okay. So in my high school, I was not top. You know, I was okay, but I was not top. And there's like 12 guys in my math class and girls. They're so fast and do things in their head. And okay, so they just whiz past me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then we get to college, go to a hard college. And, you know, there I am, you know, remember Mr. Pilmer not skipping steps. Yeah. So guess what? And I'm just, you know, I don't know. So I know how to study.
Yeah.
And I'm not skipping steps. And guess what? I get better grades in college than they did.
Yeah.
So there's a big reward to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. You can get a better job.
So like you always have to take your time when thinking.
Yeah. And you'll actually find fast talkers who can really convince people of things. Lots of times it's good to slow down and take things apart and go step by step.
Yeah.
You didn't ask me about this, but you're asking about roots. That's
your roots. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's shift the focus to education a bit because I do have like a few thoughts on education, especially since you're a professor and you're a student favorite, which I read about that. So you're as a professor, you witness the ideals and the people in the next generation all the time on almost like a daily basis, I suppose. So how often do people in your classes ask you a really thought-provoking and good question?
Almost every day.
Really? Every day?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's true. I teach mostly graduate students, but I also teach undergraduates sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and last summer, I taught some high school students online.
Wow.
Wow.
And they ask different kinds of good questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I get them all the time. And that's actually why the reason I like to teach still is you go in and you teach the way I do, you think you know something and then you get in front of the board and you start writing it down, and you find you do not know it as well as you
Yeah.
thought you did. And it's very good for your character. And you know, I make a lot of mistakes in class,
Yeah.
and the students kind of help me out.
Yeah.
So they kind of realize I'm in the same situation they are.
Hmm.
And I really like that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the specific course name for the high school students that you teach?
It didn't have a name. So what it was, okay, I'll tell you what the subject was. So it was about Python, which is a computer programming language.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, because this hat, you see this Quanticon, we have this website where
Oh
we teach.
yeah, I saw that. I saw the website.
Yeah, the T-shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about some high school students were interested in asked me whether I would be willing to teach a class online. I teach them in economics and a little math. I said yeah, and then actually, what's true is almost everyone dropped out.
Okay.
But guess what? One guy stayed,
Wow.
and he did something really fantastic.
Yeah.
And guess what? He got into Harvard.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
he's now starting Harvard.
Hmm.
Then he came back for his second year, and another guy joined him, and they both did really, really good work. So,
Yeah.
So they both learned Python, and they actually made some videos. I could show you videos. Pretty
Yeah.
funny.
Sure.
Yeah.
They made videos and they put that to teach other people about Python and economics.
Yeah. That'll be really cool.
That'd
But I have another follow-up question kind of. So I watched one of your lectures on YouTube where you kind of outlined the fiscal history of the US, and it was like at U Chicago when you were there. But it was like right before we talked to you for the first time. And at that time I was also taking AP US History 1. So in my school they split the US History into two halves. So it was really connecting to what I was doing in school regarding like Hamilton's fiscal plan for the United States and everything. And even beyond that, so I could connect to it. And personally, I find it more entertaining and easier to learn the subject matter through this way. So for you, how would you recommend that the majority of teachers in high schools right now kind of reform their current methods of teaching to maybe go a little bit more along the lines that you do?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. I just say my instinct is I don't know, and it may be that one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
But, so I actually taught so I'm trying to learn about this now.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually, a couple of years ago, I taught a fiscal history of the United States course.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this was to students at NYU. It was a master's class.
Yeah.
But I taught it entirely with Zoom videos. I taught it on Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay, so this had pluses and minuses. So the pluses were I prepared very well.
Yeah.
The minuses were it was harder to get questions from the students in a way that didn't interrupt the flow of the lecture of the video. So I don't know. I go to the gym every morning and I watch YouTube videos about math and Python and stuff.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when it's better that people aren't asking questions, because it kind of forces the lecture to be more organized, and some of the questions are great and some are off the wall.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a big audience.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think teaching technology is well, I think there's more opportunities now. Like so I like learning things from YouTube videos,
mm-hmm.
but I know people who don't like doing that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of heterogeneity, so I don't have a good answer.
Okay. Yeah, and I suppose that kind of revolves around like what level of education, and then also like the type of course, I guess.
Yeah, and also I think the kind of person. Like here's one thing I find. People differ on whether they get things by reading or by hearing a lecture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for me, it would be more along the hearing the lecture lines, because reading is.
Me too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think if you hear
you go on.
I think if you hear it, that's a better way of learning.
But there are people who are just the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, they're like, so it's like, in my freshman year in biology class, there was like a group of students who just went to the back of the classroom, took out their SAT bio textbooks and just started reading from that. And they were doing better than most people just because that was their way of learning. They couldn't be watching these YouTube videos. And like, I mean, I guess it was different styles, so it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah. I don't think one's better than the other. I think cognitive scientists or psychologists know some stuff about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So our next question comes from Arjun Menon, who is a junior in high tech high school. He's also on our CompanyRoots team. So he asked like a pretty thoughtful question, I think, as well. If you can pinpoint that one moment in time where you really just decided to go to economics, like you may have known that you wanted to do multiple things, like you had multiple hobbies, as you said, but you just decided on economics and went in it. Like when was that time? Can you pinpoint it?
Yeah, probably when I was a junior or senior in college.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, one thing that you're supposed to learn in what you're good at. So I thought of being a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
but I'd be a really bad lawyer for a whole bunch of reasons. So I kind of learned that about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then guess what? I learned, took me a while. I learned I really like to, I like to read books. I like history. I like statistics. I like lots of, economics combines lots of things.
Yeah.
And then being a professor, if you can be a professor, you don't make a lot of money,
Yeah.
but they pay you to read books. They pay you to, interact with smart young people. It's pretty good. So, and you're quite independent because you get to choose what you work on.
Yeah. And
So
you
I find that's really good for me.
Yeah. And how many colleges have you or universities have you taught at throughout your life?
I haven't counted. Um,
Mhm.
I taught at Carnegie Mellon for 1 year before I went in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
I taught at Penn for a year and a half. I taught at Minnesota for 15 years.
Wow.
Taught at
Wow.
Stanford, for a while. I taught at the University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Teach at NYU, and I've
Yeah.
visited there. So I've taught a lot of places. Sounds like I
Yeah.
took a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that you're a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution in Stanford University. So how often do you go there, and what's the atmosphere compared to at NYU, and what's the experience like being there?
Okay, so I worked there for 30 years, and I have a lot of friends there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
for me, so I go there several times a year, and interact with friends and colleagues in various fields.
Yeah.
So for me, it's great. It's a complicated question. So actually, and some of my friends from Hoover actually go to NYU. So
Wow.
that's no different.
Yeah. So back in the beginning of last year when we saw you at the UBS event,
Yeah.
you were with 3 other Nobel Prize winners. So
Yeah.
do you interact with your colleagues in that respect as well?
You mean those people?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the Hoover Institution.
No, at UBS, like Professor Hart or Professor Heckman.
Deaton,
Or
Professor Deaton.
Well, okay, so Jim Heckman was my colleague at Chicago, and
Mhm.
sure, I've had lots of interactions with him continuously.
Yeah.
I read discuss things. Angus Deaton, he's an old friend. He likes to fish. I like to fish. So we're good personal friends. And I admire him as an economist, but and I read his economics. I think he's a great economist. And Oliver Hart, it's more of a distance. I've read I met him 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He's a great theorist, and I learned a lot from his work. But it's more like
A distant relationship.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you read Professor Deaton's book on health and wealth and inequality?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was I read part of the book. It was really interesting.
Thank you for getting on this call again.
Thank you.
We're trying to arrange it for a while, but we're glad that it happened finally.
Okay, have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too.